everybody, it's Josh with Talk About Trek, and we have finished up number 25, Star Trek The Next Generation, Grounded. A historic day here in the channel's history as we finally worked our way through the first 25 of the TNG numbered novels, as well as reading quite a few things in addition to that. Before we jump into that, I just have to point out what came in the mail today, which is this fine Lower Decks t-shirt. So, take a close look at that. Hot off the presses, Crisis Point 2 Paradoxus. And they make the best t-shirts at the Lower Decks t-shirt club. This may be one of my favorites, which I think is what I said last time too, but they're all just so good. But anyway, we're talking about Grounded by David Bischoff. This was a strange book. It was a good book, but it was a strange read for me, for a number of reasons that we'll get into. But before we do that, let's go ahead and read the back cover, which will be for the first time for me. While answering a distress call from a scientific station in a remote part of the galaxy, the USS Enterprise becomes infected with a mysterious alien life form, which feeds on and transforms inorganic materials. The starship begins to gradually disintegrate, and Starfleet is forced to order its evacuation and destruction to prevent the dangerous infection from spreading throughout the galaxy. It's the end of an era for Captain Picard and his crew, who are scheduled for transfers that will split them up among several different Starfleet vessels. But even as the end draws near for the Starship Enterprise, Captain Picard begins to formulate a desperate plan to save his ship and preserve his crew, a plan that will force him to defy Starfleet orders and lead him to a confrontation with a malevolent alien force which has the power to destroy the entire Federation. Not bad. A lot of these back covers will spoil a plot point or maybe kind of ruin a fun surprise in the book. This one doesn't really do that because a lot of what they talk about on the back here is actually revealed in the prologue for the book. The book starts out with, I'm not sure what they call this storytelling device, but basically the prologue is set somewhere in the middle of the story, where the reader finds out that the Enterprise has become infected with something, it cannot be removed, and the admiral there at the starbase has ordered the Enterprise's destruction. So, dun dun dun, that's your epilogue, kind of your drama to throw you into the story. So then, the story begins with the Enterprise kind of on its typical rescue mission. So they've received a call from the planet Phaedra. There's a science team on the planet Phaedra that is studying the just peculiar geothermal action that's on that planet. Apparently everything there kind of happens at an accelerated rate, so it's a great place to be studied. One of Picard's old flames, Dr. Adrian Tillstrom, is like one of the lead geologists there, as well as, and her son is there with her as well, Michael Tillstrom. So, the first thing that kind of jumped out as strange in this book to me was the first volleyball scene. And it was like they were taking just a strange kind of left turn right at the beginning. But they do go back to this quite a bit throughout the book. So if you're a fan of volleyball, you got a little bit of that thrown in there as well. But they have a nice little scene there where basically it is the Enterprise crew has a volleyball tournament going on, and they're practicing, and it has some nice little funny moments where, of course, Worf being way too competitive, taking things way too seriously, does lead to some funny scenes there. They have a very nice conference room scene, which I'm always a fan of. One of my favorite things to see or read is basically a well-done, real Star Trek TNG conference scene. And they do a nice one here. So they play in an away team, and of course Riker is going to lead this away team down. They get down to the planet. They don't find anyone alive. Everything looks kind of trash, and everything is covered with mud. They have 2 life signs, which they finally get to, and when they get to those final 2 life signs, they get covered with a bunch of mud. And that's the end of the chapter. Another thing that this book does kind of every now and then is a little bit of like time skips, where they won't immediately pick up next chapter with what just happened. So after that happens, you might expect emergency call, and they're kind of talking through what's happening. No, they basically jump it straight to the shuttlecraft coming back now. So the shuttlecraft is coming back. They're all muddy and filthy. They have to get cleaned up, and they have to have a conference to talk about what they found. They did find 2 survivors, which of course was Dr. Tillstrom and her son Michael. Dr. Tillstrom is in much worse condition, but they do have a hope that they'll be able to revive Michael soon. They've woven a small little B story into this beginning too, where Data is helping Counselor Troy with a young woman named Penelope, who's kind of having trouble coming out of her shell. She has an extreme form of autism, which would cause her to basically, when she gets too nervous, when too much stuff is going on, just to kind of blank and kind of draw within herself. So Troy's asked Data to speak with Penelope, and he's doing that to help her and kind of help Penelope come out of her shell. So, again, that's another thing that kind of I felt in the beginning was strange about this book, is you have these so many different things going on, different new characters coming in, different storylines happening, and it took me a while to get the feel of what this book was. And about the middle of it, I had that feeling, and I'm like, I think that what this book was an episode that was written up and was rejected, so that when the author was approached then, to do a novel, he kind of had this episode and he wrote it up into a novel. Because just the way it plays out, from the prologue to the epilogue, to everything in between, it feels like you are reading or you're watching an episode, basically. So that's where I felt right about the midpoint of the book, and that's when kind of my feelings changed as well, and I really started to enjoy it quite a bit more at that time. I also didn't have a lot of time with this too, so I could give it less time each night than I would normally like to, which led it to be a little bit longer of a read. So back on the ship, they have done everything they can do with the planet. They couldn't find any other survivors. They do have other missions in the area that they have to do. So they have to get off to these other missions, and there's, I think, a delivery they have to make to like a local station or something like that. So they warp off to do that. In the meantime, things kind of get back to normal on the ship. They have a planned dance in 10 Forward with like a band going on. And of course, the volleyball tournament is in full effect too. Worf is going wild. His team is not doing the best, which leads to some very angry and very funny Worf scenes in the book there. Now, right about the time I really started liking this book was right here. And this is when they're warping to their next destination. And for Picard, he just has this feeling. Like something doesn't feel right about the ship. According to everything that they, all the scans and everything, nothing is showing up there, but he knows something feels off. And he feels it so much that he orders Geordi to do a level 1 diagnostic. And in doing this diagnostic, they do find that when they washed this mud off and they ejected this mud from the Enterprise, it actually connected, adhered, and kind of joined with the molecular structure of the Enterprise. So now there's like these 2 different patches, and it's in the pipes, and it's everywhere, basically. They've got an infection of this mud. They have a cool scene here where they do EV. They go outside the ship, Geordi and a couple other crew members, to examine the patch on the outside, and the Enterprise hull actually kind of rolls like a wave, and at one point even comes alive and attacks them. They're able to all get back inside safely thanks to some fast work by Transporter Chief O'Brien. A couple of nice O'Brien scenes thrown in there, which I liked. But it's at that point they realize kind of what they're dealing with, and they have but one choice, which is to get to a starbase, because they can't deal with this on their own. So, in the meantime, they're trying to learn more from Michael Tillstrom, who did wake up, and he takes up a kind of a large portion of this plot, which also kind of made me realize that, he was like the week's guest star. If this was going to be your TV show, your episode of the TV show, Michael and this Penelope were like the two guest stars of the week that would be on for that episode. So when I saw them kind of in that light, and really their characters kind of made a lot more sense for me, I guess. So Michael is kind of flirting with Penelope, and Penelope's kind of flirting with Michael, and they're doing that at that dance in 10 Forward while the EV scene is going on. And it's at that time when basically they realize something is going on the Enterprise, and they jet for the starbase then. Now, Michael does want to help, but has lost all of his memory in the attack. So there's nothing he can do at this point. When he does start getting his memory back, that's when the twist comes in. As his memory comes back, so does the control that this mud actually has over him as well. So throughout the book, they've thrown in these kind of little interludes of the mud forming consciousness as it grows bigger, and kind of explaining itself that it needs to grow bigger, to grow more consciousness, to take over. And you get this look inside this kind of primitive mind of this mud as it achieves sentience and kind of talks about what it needs to do. And that happens kind of interspersed throughout the whole book. So it gets to this point in the book where the mud has actually become kind of like fully sentient. At one point it even is able to speak, it speaks to Picard, it speaks to Data. So they get to the starbase, and of course this is kind of where the story meets up with the prologue there. The ship is to be scuttled. They have Admiral Davies, who's the in command there of the region on the starbase, who has an old grudge with Picard that they kind of bring up. And he's decided, with the help of a Dr. Chavez, that the Enterprise cannot be saved. So they have to drag it out, they have to blow it up, and the Enterprise crew has to be sent off to other ships. So they kind of have one remaining hope at this point, which is Data, who, not being organic, has been able to stay on the ship and kind of continue with his his research into the most effective way to get this thing off of there. Michael had given them a plan for like a basic spray that would slow down the growth of it, but since he was a double agent, that didn't help at all, and actually kind of helped, I think, the mud more than it did hurt it. Now, Data is working hard as he can to try to figure it out. The mud is growing and growing, and at one point, like I said, it kind of turns itself into a mud man and talks to Data. I am ranting about this thing so much. Rant alert. Press it. Anyway, there's more to talk about, too. Mudman attacks Data, and this is when Data figures out the weakness. It tries to envelop him, squish him, but is repelled. And it's repelled by, Data figures out, is his EM field, basically. So they have to figure out a way to modulate a specific EM field, which they can then project throughout the whole ship to knock this mud out. So they figure out how to do it, but they're going to have to sneak back onto the ship against Admiral Davies' orders to do so. So Picard, Geordi, and Worf sneak back onto the ship in the end, in the last kind of exciting chapters. They have to go down to engineering. They have to reroute some isolinear chips. And you can always, it always sticks out in my mind. Like, this was totally written to be a show. You got that great scene of Data quickly rerouting isolinear chips. So that was written in here. At the same time, Geordi has to go somewhere in a Jeffries tube and do something up there. So you kind of got these two different missions going on, while Picard and Worf are trying to stall for time, while the mud's trying to bust in the door the whole time. And this is the exciting conclusion of the book. And the mud is just kind of getting in there, and it's got a hold of him, and Picard has to kind of reach up and get one more button. He's got to press this one button to activate Geordi's sequence, but the mud has got a hold of him, and he can't do it. But luckily, on board the Enterprise, Penelope is helping Michael, who is basically knocked into a coma, contact the mud via her psi powers. It gets a little crazy there, admittedly. But if you read the whole thing, it all kind of works together. But anyway, the B plot comes into the A plot, and it helps weaken the mud enough where Picard jumps out of the mud, hits the button, and the mud all turns back into mud. Crisis is averted. The Enterprise is saved. and it was a very interesting episode of Star Trek. And I could really see the whole episode in my mind, especially after I found out that that was truly what it was. I mean, once I kind of started reading it as a rejected script turned into a book, I could totally see it. And it was fun. It was really, really fun. David Bischoff, I think, did a great job, and I am happy to report that I have my Voyages of the Imagination on hand here, because this was actually, there was a lot written up about this. So this book was written by Jeff Ayres, and he went through basically all these Star Trek novels here and tried to contact the authors to find out more about them. And this is what David Bischoff said about his book, Grounded. Grounded is a novel born of hope, education, and desperation. I have written by myself and with collaborators close to 100 novels. Grounded was, is, and will remain an anomaly. I look back at it with awe, wonder, and terror. I thought that was pretty interesting. He goes on to say that basically he was a scriptwriter for TNG. He actually wrote Tin Man with another writer, and also worked on the episode First Contact from the 4th season. And then he had a few of these kind of scripts that were rejected, and he had a time when he was suggested to submit them. So he did. He felt this one was his favorite, and he submitted it, and that was the end of it. In the end, he said that he had earned more money on Grounded than any other novel in his career. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 3 weeks. So, a really great write-up on this book. So, I love having those little extra bits of reference to kind of confirm what I was thinking there in the first place. So how do we wrap it up on TNG number 25, Grounded? Again, we feel like we're kind of at a bit of a milestone here. We've hit the 25th of the numbered TNG books. And the whole reason I started to even record these was because I wanted to read and record my thoughts on the numbered TNG series. So, 25 already. Awesome. I'm really happy to be doing this, really happy that other people would like to listen to me and watch this at all. Thank you so much for doing that. I know exactly where I'm going from here, which is going to be Star Trek TNG's first giant novel, Metamorphosis, which is by Jean Loran, I believe. And it's kind of small from here, so it's hard for me to read. But that was suggested by a viewer, so I'm going to jump into that next. And really excited because I know nothing about it other than it is going to be very good. Very, very good. So I'm looking forward to going into that, and probably will be jumping into that tonight. So we're going to end it there. As always, everybody, thank you so much for watching this talk of TNG's 25 Grounded. We'll see you very soon, hopefully, for another Star Trek book talk, or Star Trek toy talk, or Star Trek t-shirt talk. Who knows what's next. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Live long and prosper. And we'll see you next time. Bye.